Okay, good morning, everybody. I'm pleased to welcome you to our webinar about resume building for students seeking articling roles in law. I hope that you walk away from this session equipped with some valuable tools for your job search. First, some introductions. I'm Eric Pye, Student Services Advisor with CPLED. One of my roles is to support prep students who have not yet secured articles to do so. Before we begin, I want to walk you through briefly through a few features of this webinar software. There should be a side panel on the right-hand side of your screen. To expand the side panel, you may have to select an orange arrow button to see all of the features. When you can see all the features located in that side panel, you'll see a chat tab where you can type questions throughout the webinar. I'll be answering questions at the end of the webinar, but please feel free to post questions throughout so they're not forgotten and I can address them at the end. I also wanted to mention that this webinar will be recorded and posted on our website. And it will be posted on our website under the Students section within Student Services. And you can see that within the Student Services section, we have some information about the articling search supports that CPLED offers to prep students, and also some resources, and I will be referring to some of these resources throughout the presentation. Let's get started. So I'm just going to close this window out and transfer us to a different page. So the purpose of the resume, so we're going to be talking about resumes and about cover letters. The purpose of the resume is not to get you a job. The purpose of the resume is to get you an interview. And the same is true of your cover letter. We'll be talking about both of those documents in this webinar. But basically, your resume and your cover letter, they are marketing documents. They are not sales documents. You will have a chance to sell yourself in an interview. So these documents are to get you to that interview stage. What you want to do with your resume and your cover letter is to create interest so that you can close the sale when you get into the interview session. Okay. The big thing to remember about your resume is that it's less about you and more about your target employer. And so you always need to be thinking with your resume and your cover letter, what does the target employer want? What does the law firm want? What does the government agency want that I'm applying to? What are they looking for? And these are called the buying motivators of the employer. And just as an example of buying motivators, if I want to buy a sweater, which I probably am not doing at this time of year, but let's say it's fall and I want to buy a sweater, and I go into the sweater shop, the person serving me there will of course ask me, what are you looking for? And I'll say, I want to buy a sweater. That person is not going to show me every sweater in the store because some of those sweaters will not be interesting to me. In the same way, so they'll ask me, so what colors do you like? Do you want a cotton sweater? Do you want a wool sweater? Do you want long sleeves? Do you want a V-neck? Do you want a crew neck? Do you like your sweaters to fit loose? Do you want a cardigan? All these kinds of questions to find out exactly what kind of sweater I'm looking for. And then they will take me to those particular sweaters and they'll show me some things that they expect I will be interested in. And they'll bypass all the ones that I've already said I don't like. So for example, they wouldn't show me red sweaters because I don't like red. In the same way, you want to be doing this with your resume and your cover letter. You want to be showing the employer, you want to be showing the firm, only the things that are going to be interesting to them. And there's a lot of very simple ways of finding out what will be interesting to them. One is to look at their website and to think about based on the website, what is going to be interesting in terms of, in terms of culture, my values, so on and so forth, the duties of the job that I'm applying for. The biggest area that you can find out what they're interested in is by looking at the job posting. And the job posting will tell all of the things that they're looking for in terms of the requirements, the kind of person they want, and then you need to make sure that you fit your documents to those buying motivators. And we call that your value proposition. Value proposition being, this is how I match what you are looking for in a prospective articling student. So what does the firm look for, and what are they interested in? The first thing they're probably looking for is a cultural fit. They're going to want to answer two questions. Number one, will we like working with you, and will you stay with us? And you're likely to stay with us if the firm size is what you would be looking for, if we practice the type of law that you're interested in, if you get along with the staff members, if our values are similar, and those kinds of things. The other questions that the employer is trying to answer is, do you have the ability to do the job? Do you have the qualifications, and do you have the transferable skills? And keep in mind that for articling positions, a lot of the requirements in terms of education will have come through your law degree or through your NCA certificate of qualifications. And if you have one of those two, then more than likely you're going to meet the education requirements. But then they're going to be looking at other areas, other skills. And I've talked with a lot of legal recruiters about what they look for in articling students, and surprisingly, a lot of the things that they mentioned have little to do with the actual law. They're looking for transferable skills. They're looking for skills that are going to be useful in a legal context. And some of the ones that they've listed for me frequently are things like customer service, because you're going to be dealing with clients all the time and you need to be keeping them happy. Time management, as you know, everything in law is based on billable hours and time recording and so on. So you need to be good at the time management and also at record keeping. They're going to be looking for skills for problem solving. They're going to be looking for teamwork and communication. They're going to be looking for community involvement. They're going to be potentially looking for entrepreneurial or business development skills. And a lot of the recruiters have indicated to me that they're also looking for humility and hunger to succeed. And so that, you don't want to be bragging too much. You want to, particularly when you get to interviews, you need to show how interested you are in improving and learning and developing and contributing. Those are all important as well. And so any of these transferable skills that you can improve, that you can include in your resume or in your cover letter are going to be very, very useful to you. The third thing that employers are looking for, particularly at the resume and cover letter stage, is, are your documents easy to digest? So by that, can we look at them quickly and get the information we need? And a lot of this is going to come down to formatting. And then, do you use simple language in your content? Simple language is, of course, an important skill to use as a lawyer so that the general populace can understand you. But also in your resume, can you show that off by describing your jobs using simple language, using short sentences, using language that is easy to follow and understand, and we don't have to think about too much. And so all of these need to go into your value proposition and how you're going to be satisfying the buying motivators of the companies, the firms that you're applying to, okay? So that's just a little bit of background. What I'm going to do for the rest of this session is I'm going to work through a resume, and we're going to talk about it from beginning to end. And then once we've talked about the resume, we're going to then move on and we're going to talk about your cover letter. And we'll see how these elements that I've talked about in terms of meeting the buying motivators and being easy to find things and so on, how they fit into the actual documents. Okay. So to start with, you can see the document that I'm sharing right now is the top part of a resume. I'm just going to downsize this a little bit so you can see the whole thing. You can see that this document has quite a lot of white space. And white space is important because it makes the document more welcoming. It makes it easier to look at. It doesn't feel like something that's cramped where you've really tried to stuff a whole bunch of information in. You'll see that this resume is 2 pages. And 2 pages, the feedback that I've had from the legal recruiters I've spoken to, 2 pages is the ideal length for an articling level position. A 1-page resume is not going to give enough detail and enough information for the recruiters to make a decision about inviting you for an interview. And anything longer than 2 pages is likely to be full of information that is not relevant to the recruiters. So 2 pages is a good goal to shoot for. Now, in shooting for 2 pages, that doesn't mean using a size 14 font if your resume is short, or using a size 8 font if you have a lot of information. Your fonts, you should be looking at either 10 point or 11 point for the body of your resume. Your headings can be 1 point bigger. So for example, if you're using an 11-point font for the resume, then your section headings like articling candidate and education and so on, those can be 12 point. And then your name can be slightly larger. You'll notice at the top of the resume, the header is very short. I see a lot of people who put their full address, and you don't need to give your full address. In fact, giving your full address can work against you in some cases. If we have a law firm in the southwest corner of Calgary, they might not want to interview or hire somebody from the Northeast, not because they're discriminating against the Northeast, but because the Northeast is at the opposite side of the city, and in wintertime when roads are bad, that could mean that the employee is going to be absent from work or is going to be late from work, or there could be other issues like that. I don't believe that this happens a lot in Calgary, but I have worked in cities where that kind of, you could call it discrimination, does happen. So it's best to leave the address off. I would put the name of the city that you live in and the name of the province, and that's enough. You'll also notice that the address or the location, the phone number and the email address are all in a single line. You don't need to put those one above the other. And again, the reason for this, particularly for somebody who's more experienced, and this happens a lot with some of the internationally trained lawyers and law students that we have in the prep program. If you're trying to save space to fit in a lot of detailed work information, then you don't want to be using up that space with the header, which is relatively unimportant. In this resume, we can see that there is, the next section that we see is a profile of sorts, a very, very brief description or summary of this person's background. 5 lines, maybe 4, maybe 6, definitely not more than 6 lines is a good amount to use if you are going to have a profile. And one of the things that I've heard from the legal recruiters that I've interviewed is that for very recent graduates, so for somebody, for example, who just graduated from law school or just got their CQ and doesn't have a lot of work experience in the recent past, they don't want to see a profile. They would like to see that particular student jump straight into the education. But if you have an internationally trained lawyer, or if we have somebody who's made a career change and is now trying to become a lawyer, perhaps after 5 or 10 years in the work world, then it's good to have this summary of some of the areas of law that the person has worked in, or some of the relevant industries that they've worked in, as we can see here. And so we've got the length of experience, we've got some information about areas of law and other areas that this person has worked, and we've also got the current volunteer position that they're doing with pro bono law, And we've got the fact that this person is currently enrolled in the practice readiness education program. And that could be a selling point to some of the firms out there. The fact that you're already partway through the prep means potentially that this firm is not going to have to make time for you during your articles to be away for some of the education portions that other students might have to be. So the profile is important. Then what the recruiters like to see next is the education, particularly because articling is considered an entry-level position for the law industry. Education is more than likely going to trump legal work experience. And education is the most important thing because there are certain qualifications that you must have in order to be accepted into an articling role. You can see here that this person, Terry, is already doing the practice readiness education program, and so that there is included. For any education that is ongoing, you should show the start date of that education and indicate that it is current by using the start date to present in the date on the right there. For any education that has been completed, you don't have to give the duration. All you need to do is show the date at which you finished or completed or received your qualification or whatever the case may be. In this particular case, we have an NCA student who has secured their certificate of qualifications. And then we have some additional information about some of the legal and the post-secondary education that they've had back to 2010. One thing I do want to point out also at this point is you'll notice that I've used some color shading in this particular resume to show where the different sections are separated. As I said at the beginning, it's very important for legal recruiters that they can find information quickly. A lot of times there's only one recruiter who's trying to recruit anywhere from 1 to 15 or 17 positions, and they are going to get hit with hundreds of applications during the recruiting periods that they have. And so they need to work through these resumes and cover letters very, very quickly. And if you make it difficult for them to find the information, they won't bother searching too much. A lot of times, if it's too difficult, they'll just put it aside and think, you know, there's other candidates there that are easier to learn about. So we'll focus on those candidates. So the color can be a nice way to make it easy to find things, and color also makes the document a little bit more welcoming. So something to think about in putting together your resume. You're also you'll notice that the section headers are very, very simple. You know, you don't want to make your section headers too long. So for example, legal work experience here, education. You don't want to be putting education and certifications or education and other things. Just make it very, very simple so that it's easy to find these things. Okay. So let's move on from the education section. And now we're going to get into the work experience and your job descriptions. And so there's a few things that I want to talk about here and that are important. The formatting of your job descriptions is important. You want to make it, again, easy to find things. You definitely want to let the three main things that you want to let people know is the name of the employer, the job title that you had, and the dates of your positions. The most important is probably the employer and the job title, and so those you want to have on the left-hand side because they've done scientific experiments, and these show that recruiters, when they're looking through a resume quickly, will tend to look at the left-hand side of the document and not so much at the right. The dates are not really all that important until the point where the person has become interested in you as a candidate and is perhaps doing a second scan. And at this point, they'll try to figure out what is your career story, and they'll look at the dates to see how long you were at different places and so on and so forth. So that's the reason why the dates are on the right here. A lot of the resumes that I review have dates on the left, and you're really not helping the recruiter here because that's unimportant information. The next thing I want you to notice is that for the employer, there's a little bit of information about the employer. And this is important, particularly if you have worked for companies that are not well known in your home area. So if you've moved from one part of Canada to another and you work for an organization that somebody in your target location doesn't know about, giving some context is going to be useful. And if you are internationally trained, this becomes even more important because companies that you may have worked for in your home country, probably a legal recruiter in Calgary or in Halifax or in Winnipeg is going to know nothing about this employer. And knowing something about the employer helps us to have some context for the work that you did there. And so, for example, if we take a look at the job at the bottom of the page here with Betos Limited, Accra, Ghana, we can see some information about how big the office was, how many people were working as contractors, what kind of services the company had, and what kind of activities they did. And that really just helps to flesh out the understanding of the recruiter. You'll see that this is not a long description. It's only 2 lines. You'll see also that Pro Bono Law Alberta has a description. And it's quite likely that somebody in the legal industry would know about Pro Bono Law Alberta, particularly if it's an Alberta firm that's recruiting. However, for consistency, if you're going to describe some of the employers, then you should describe all of them. Sorry. Then you'll notice that under the job title, there's a brief description also about what the job entailed. And this is one of the areas where I think more students and more job seekers in general of all ages, they kind of screw up a little bit. A lot of times we'll see 8 bullets, 12 bullets, sometimes 15 bullets. I've seen as many as 20 bullets describing in very, very minute detail all of the activities that the person did in the job that they did. And a lot of times these don't add any value, because if I take a look at the job title student volunteer and I see that it's with Pro Bono Law Alberta, as a legal recruiter, I already have a pretty good idea of what somebody in that position would do with that organization. So any details that you give me about the job duties are probably not going to help me understand your job better. So what you can do is you can really summarize down in that what there is a 1.5 line summary of the job, and then any bullet points can be saved for either the scope of work, so how often did you do something, how many clients did you serve, how much money were you dealing with, and those kinds of things, or what we call accomplishments. And accomplishments would be anything where you did some work that had an impact on the company's bottom line. So perhaps you helped the company to improve their revenue, or you helped the company to save costs, or you help the company to increase customer satisfaction so that customer retention was maintained. And so those are the kinds of things that you want to be putting in your bullet points. A lot of times in the bullet points, we call them SMART accomplishments. They need to be specific, they need to be measurable, and measurable I think is important. And there needs to be a result. So the SMART is actually specific, measurable, action-oriented, result, and time-bound. So of those 5, probably the result and the measurability are important. So you can see here for this, for Terry, in the job that they had with Betos Limited, and this actually goes across the page, they've described the position of legal administrative officer in 2 very short lines with just some of the general duties that they oversaw, not too much detail. And then we've got some fairly specific activities and with impact. So editing and reviewing contracts for 10 major transactions, giving the dollar amount, Canadian dollars, $70,000. We've got managing tax payments and the specific areas of tax that they worked in. And so, you know, this is giving us some really meaty information that again is going to tie into some of those transferable skills that I talked about at the beginning. So editing and reviewing contracts is going to show certainly some legal relationship there, but it's also going to be tying into attention to detail. The managing tax payments is going to include things like record keeping, and so we're highlighting performance that is going to be seen positively by the legal employers and the legal recruiters. So we can see here that this particular student has the pro bono position. They have the position with Bedos Limited. Then they have a position with KBL Energy. And just for your information, all of these names are made up. They're not actually real companies if you're interested in going out and researching more. And then we can see at the end of the list of jobs that there are some previous roles, and for these we haven't given any details. Basically just those important categories of job title, of employer, and dates. This is not necessarily so important for somebody who's fresh out of law school in Canada, but for an internationally trained lawyer who's perhaps worked for multiple firms, and perhaps has 10 or 15 or even 20 years of work experience behind them, this does become important because I get the complaint all the time from people when I'm working with a resume, oh, I can't fit it into 2 pages. Well, okay, so what you need to be doing is thinking about what do we do with a resume when it comes to multiple positions? And the common resume best practices are to highlight the most recent 3 or 4 jobs and to go back no more than 10 years in your experience. And so in this particular case, we've highlighted 3 jobs and we've gone back to 2015, which is 6 years ago. And then what we've done is we've summarized any other positions into this previous roles list. And what's good about this is that, again, as I said, when I see legal intern with a law firm in the United Kingdom, I probably have some idea of what a legal intern does. So any description or added detail here is probably not going to be too useful. An administrative assistant as well. I probably have a pretty good idea of what an administrative assistant does, so it's not important to have any more detail there. But what having this previous roles section does is it keeps those jobs as part of your career story, and it makes them open for questions in an interview. So the interviewer might see the legal intern position and think, oh, okay, that's really interesting to me. And in an interview, they can ask you about that. The only reason that they know about it is because you did describe it in your resume. So it's part of your story, and it's going to help in generating questions for the interviewers when it gets to that stage. The next section we have is volunteer activities. And if you remember, one of the things that recruiters really look for is community involvement. Are you somebody who's going to contribute to society at large? Do you have that spirit of wanting to help others? And so having some volunteer positions there is good if you actually have volunteered. Any volunteering in a legal context is always going to be additionally handy because it's relevant to the practice of law. If you have a lot of volunteer positions, then perhaps you're going to need to be selective and not showcase all of them. The other possibility is that I know that a lot of students who don't have a lot of work experience but have done a lot of volunteering, you can actually put your volunteer activities into your job descriptions. And you can see that this particular student, the civil claims volunteer with pro bono, is actually the first position in their legal work experience. And this is one thing to keep in mind, is that sometimes volunteer experiences are just as valuable as paid experiences. And so you shouldn't be too afraid to include a volunteer experience in that work area. And then the final thing on the resume is the interests. And this is feedback that I received from almost all of the legal recruiters that I spoke to. I've had many meetings with legal recruiters since I started with CPLED a year ago. They like to see your interests. They want to know a little bit about what kind of person are you outside of school, outside of work. And so listing some interests is going to be useful. The big thing you want to do with your interests, though, is to make them interesting. So I see a lot of people who put in interest sections and they'll say things like, I like cooking, reading, and singing. Well, I'm sorry, that's not very interesting because a lot of people like cooking, reading, and singing. So can you tell me something specific about those interests that is going to make me more interested in you and in those interests? And so here we can see that for each of those interests, the person has given some specific details about being part of a small singing group and about the kinds of food that they like to cook and about one of the books that they've read recently. It's handy if you include reading as an interest. It can be handy to put a book in there that has some kind of a legal tie-in. The one thing you need to make sure is that you're not just name dropping books because it may be that the person interviewing has also read that book and they may ask questions about it. And if you don't know anything about the book, then it's going to certainly look like you've been lying in your resume, which you don't want to be doing. So that basically covers the main elements of the resume. As I said at the beginning of this webinar, one of my jobs is to support prep students who are currently searching for articles. And one of the things that I will do typically with all of those students is I will do a resume review and make sure that we get you with a resume that is marketing you appropriately. If you are attending this webinar and you are not yet a prep student, please know that when you do start prep, that you would be eligible for these services. And also that the sample documents that I'm showing you here, as I mentioned, these are available for download on our website if you do want to take a look at there. And we also have some templates with additional comments that you can use as a guide for developing your own resume and cover letter. So from the resume, I'm now going to move on to the cover letter. And the first thing I want you to note, if we flick back and forth between the cover letter and the resume and the cover letter and the resume and the cover letter, is that they look almost identical. And what you really want to do is you want to make sure that your job application, your resume and your cover letter, that they appear like a coherent document that belongs together. So if you're using any kind of color shading, use the same color, use the same font, use the same text size, use the same margin size. And on the topic of margins, 2 centimeters is pretty much the perfect balance between too wide and too narrow. If your margins are only 1 centimeter and you're really trying to cram a lot of information in, that comes across subconsciously to the recruiter, and a lot of recruiters don't like that. A lot of recruiters like to make notes in the margins of a resume, and if you don't give them space to do that, they're not happy. By the same standpoint, I see some resumes come in that are 3 centimeter margins, and that's just too much. It looks like you're trying to fill the page, but you don't really have much to say about yourself. And so a lot of times these subconscious messages that even the recruiters may be not aware of, they do play a part. And so be careful about that information. So as I said, the layout is basically the same. We have the header, again, not taking up too much space. The location, the phone number, the email address. One thing that you can add on both the resume and the cover letter, if you have a LinkedIn profile, you could perhaps add a second line to your header information there with the LinkedIn URL. And that allows the recruiter to take a look at you online and perhaps learn some more information about you that you are able to control because you're the one who's created the profile there. Next things we see are the name of the person who's going to be reading the letter. So Paulette Jones here, the name of the firm and the location. You don't need to use the full address if you don't want to. Again, that takes up space. And then we have the date of the letter. Now, if you don't know the name of the person that you're sending the letter to, then of course you'll leave out the name Paulette Jones. Then once you've got your header there of the articling student position and the reference number, if you're responding directly to a job posting, then you're going to have the salutation. So here, Dear Ms. Jones. If you don't know the name of the person that is going to read your letter, do not use to whom it may concern. Do not use dear sir, madam. Do not use dear recruiter. Just leave the salutation out altogether, okay? If you know the name, it highlights that you've done some research and you've been able to find out the name of the person that this is going to. And I know in some of the job descriptions that you'll see the name of the person that you should address the letter to, and so that's great, you have the information. This is particularly important when you're writing speculative letters to firms not based on the job posting, but just based on cold calling. If you don't know the name of the person who's going to see the letter, don't have the salutation there. Next, I'd like to talk about the content of your letter. And cover letters are a challenge. I know that for most job seekers, and I have been a job seeker myself, there is this desire to tell every wonderful thing about yourself to the recruiter in the hopes that one of these wonderful things is going to resonate with them and that will cause them to invite you to an interview. I will tell you that that is the wrong approach. We call that the shotgun approach. You basically shoot and you spray out a whole bunch of information and you hope that something hits the target. What you need to be doing is you need to be targeting much more finely. You need to be a sharpshooter. You need to be like a target shooter in the Olympics. So everything that goes into your cover letter and everything that goes into your resume should be based, as we said, on what is it that the firm is looking for? What is it that they will find attractive about an articling candidate? So we talked about the fact that we have these questions that they want to be answering. So will we like you? Will you stay? And those are both related to kind of the culture of the organization, the work situation, the values, and so on. And then we have those questions: can they do the job? Do they have the required qualifications? Do they have the transferable skills? So what you want to do in your cover letter is you want to deal with those two question types separately, but you want to do it in a very, very precise way. So my suggestion, and I'm not saying that you have to do it this way, but best practice in resumes and cover letters is, in your first paragraph, you want to make sure that you somehow develop a feeling that there is a connection between you and the firm that you are applying to. And in that connection, it may be around somebody that you know who works there. It may be around some research that you've done. It may be around your legal interests. It may be around the work environment that you like to work in. It may be any number of things like that. But you want to tell a story that makes it clear that you have researched the firm, that you know something about the firm, and based on your knowledge of the firm, you see a connection to your interests and your contributions that you'll be able to make. So if we take a look at this particular letter, we see that the person is volunteering for pro bono law. We see that they work with Jenny Smith, who is an associate at the XYZ firm. Now, this is important. If you can name drop, if you know somebody that works at the firm, this is always going to be useful, because almost guaranteed, whoever the recruiter is, in this case, Paulette Jones, she's going to go to Jenny Smith and say, Jenny Smith, I see that you work with Terry Acquasi at Pro Bono Law. Can you tell me something about Terry, right? And if Jenny Smith has been impressed with your work, and if Jenny Smith likes working with you, she's going to tell the recruiter wonderful things about you, and this will almost guarantee you an interview. It won't guarantee you an interview, but it certainly increases your chances of getting an interview. Then Terry talks about some of the things that they've learned from Jenny Smith. So learned about the fact that it's a great place to work, about the fact that it's a small office, that there's a good feeling of camaraderie between the people working there, and that XYZ specializes in corporate and commercial law. Now we draw the connection. Terry prefers working in a friendly atmosphere where they know all their colleagues and they have a strong desire to work in corporate law, and in particular in contracts and regulatory compliance. So we're showing that we have an understanding here of the firm. We're showing here that there's a really good likelihood that I will be happy working in this location if I'm Terry. And this is going to increase the chances that the recruiter sees a good fit of you within that company or within that firm. You see at the very end of this paragraph, we talk about the job posting and about enthusiastically applying for the position. And this is something I would highly want to draw your attention to. I worked as a recruiter for 3 years, and I read cover letter after cover letter after cover letter, and every time I read a cover letter that started with, please accept my application for the position of XYZ, I felt like putting pins in my eyes. I was so bored by that. I found it so frustrating because it was such an uninteresting start to a letter. And again, this is the reason for the story. If you can tell a story that is captivating, that is interesting, that highlights a little bit about you as a person, that creates a connection with you and the reader, it greatly increases your chances of getting an interview. So please, please, please do not start your letters in that way. You can add it at the end of the first paragraph, but at this point, it feels like, it makes sense. We understand why you're applying for this job because we can completely see the connection that you've made. Then we get into the second section of the cover letter, and this is where we answer the question, can you do the job? Do you have the qualifications that we're asking for, and do you have some of those buying motivator transferable skills that I listed off at the beginning? So we talk here about the job posting that we looked at, and then we talk about the excellent match. And in this particular case, we've prerequisite legal education for an articling position, I would say, should always be your first bullet, because you want to talk about, I meet your qualifications. I have my law degree, or I have my CQ. And just as a side note for anybody that's come through the NCA route for their qualifications, most law firms will not consider applicants who do not yet have their CQ yet for an articling position. They will consider NCA candidates that don't have a CQ for summer positions, but if you're applying for an articling position, you pretty much have to have your CQ already, or the firms will not consider you for an articling role. Now, I don't want you to discourage from applying if you don't have your CQ yet, particularly if your CQ is due any minute. But don't be too disappointed if you don't get invited to an interview based on that, okay? Then we see the second bullet points here that we've focused in on two of those transferable skills that I spoke about earlier. We've got the customer service experience, and we've got the community involvement in legal contexts. And then for each of these bullets, we've given some additional information. Okay, so for the customer service, we've given some customer service experience examples from the elevator company that Terry worked for. And for the community involvement, we've gone back to the pro bono law position and talked a little bit about how that has helped Terry to develop their knowledge of the legal context, but also to understand the needs of clients. And so, we're giving some really useful information here for the recruiter. Now, Terry may have tons of other information that they want to include in their cover letter, but is that information relevant to an articling position in a Canadian legal context? My suggestion is to leave all of that information out. So just focus in on the things that are going to be appealing to the recruiter in the letter. and keep your cover letter to 1 page max. Okay, you'll see that this letter fits very, very easily into a single page. If this person wanted to add 2 or 3 lines more, they could, but resist the temptation to go past the 1 page mark. One additional piece about the cover letter that's important, and this is why it's important to keep it short. As I said, it's important that the recruiter can go through the documents quickly, but there's also the fact that cover letters, in some cases, they are read, and in other cases, they are not read. Sometimes they are required in your application package, but they're not actually read because the legal recruiter doesn't have time to look at both the resume and the cover letter. It may be that they look at the cover letter later in the selection process, but not at the very beginning. So for this standpoint, if it's not going to be read, you don't want to spend too much time on it. But if it is going to be read, you have to have some impact there. And that's where the story and this very, very brief kind of highlighting of the qualifications and transferable skills is important. And you can see that the last paragraph of the letter is very, very short. You don't have to thank the person for reading your resume and for spending time considering your application. You don't have to add additional information about yourself because you've already done that in the letter, and a lot of the information is probably in the resume as well. Very, very short. I look forward to meeting with you in an interview to discuss my experience and skills and how I can contribute to success with XYZ LLP. That's all you have to do, and then sign off and your letter is done. Okay, so you can see that our cover letter is simple, it's short. You can see that it and the resume are easy to navigate. Everything is nicely separated with the colored headings and with good white space between the different sections. And we're keying in on the buying motivators of the law firm that we are applying to. And if you can do all of those things, then you will likely be successful at getting interviews very shortly. As I said, or I didn't say this actually, but one of the things to be aware of is that there is an Alberta recruiting session on the VI Law portal that starts on the 14th of May, which is this Friday, and it goes until the 25th of May. For anybody that is not yet signed up on the VI Law portal, I'm going to suggest that you perhaps take a look at my LinkedIn profile, and I'm just going to go back to my LinkedIn profile because there's something that I would like to show you there. So this is particularly useful for anyone that is an internationally trained lawyer or law student. If you haven't gone through a Canadian law school and perhaps aren't yet signed up to the VI Law portal, what I'd like to do is draw your attention. This is my profile page on LinkedIn. And if you come to my profile page and you scroll down to the featured section, I have an article here about internationally trained law students and the search for articling positions. And within that article, there is a section about the VI Law portal. If you do need information about that, please do go and read that article. It'll be very, very useful for you in terms of understanding more about the recruiting sessions and periods that the law firms do in the different jurisdictions across Canada. And as I said, for people who are looking to article in Alberta, there is a session coming up on Friday, and you will definitely want to be involved in that. And hopefully you'll be able to use some of the information from today's session in making your resume and cover letter more effective for that session.